What's the weirdest rule you had to follow at your childhood home? I wasn't allowed to put sugar in my tea because my mom told me that when you go to prison, they don't let you have sugar, so it will make prison that much harder. 1. Thanks for having so much faith in me, Mom. 2. I'm pretty sure you are allowed sugar for your tea in prison. Story 2 was actually a friend, not me. Basically, at his house, him and his brother were allowed in only 3 rooms, their bedrooms and the bathroom. The kitchen, living room, and conservatory were completely off limits. If they wanted water, they had to ask, and a parent would bring a glass from the kitchen. The conservatory was used for family meals, but apparently a lot of the time they just gave the kids food on plates to eat in their room. It really weirded me out as a kid when I went round. I would be greeted by the parents. They would escort me to my mate's bedroom, then close the door behind me. When it was time to leave, my mate had to call for his parents to then escort me out. No idea why they had this rule. The mom didn't work and literally sat at home all day every day, just chain smoking in the living room. Story 3. I wasn't allowed to do anything near a windows. My mom was convinced that our neighbors were always watching us, so I had to crouch down whenever I went by a window. Story 4. Guests weren't allowed to use the upstairs washroom. And by guests, I mean specifically if me or my siblings had friends over. We weren't allowed to offer them any food or drinks except water. I'm pretty sure my mom just wanted to make my house as inhospitable as possible so that she could destroy those friendships. She thought that friends were a distraction and that studying was all that mattered. Story 5. My parents were hoarders. We were not allowed to mess with their stuff. I clean, in any capacity. It was a nightmare to live in. My dad died when I was younger, but after my mom died, we had the house and its contents condemned, razed, and sold the land. To this day, mess makes me anxious. Story 6. The most bizarre house rule that I've encountered was at my friend's place, where they had a strict policy of no talking during dinner. Not because of any traditional reason, but because their elderly grandmother believed that a mischievous spirit living in the dining room would learn secrets and cause chaos. Story 7. We were not allowed to cut through the flower bed out front to get to the sidewalk. The rule is perfectly fine. It was just that my mom convinced her young children that a family of dead people would grab your ankles and pull you into the ground for eternity if you set foot in the garden. It absolutely terrified me until I was old enough to know better. Story 8. We weren't allowed outside if an adult wasn't home. Even into high school, got off the bus with a group of kids and stood outside chatting with them for a few minutes before going home. Neighbor tattled on me, grounded for 2 weeks. Decided, okay, if I can't stay outside for a few minutes, I'll invite them into the house, since no one said I couldn't. Yep, grounded for a month. No wonder I have problems making friends, Mom. Story 9. My mother was in a constant war with the deer that constantly ate her garden and was willing to try every trick she could find to keep them away from her beloved plants. One article she read was that the smell of human urine deters deer. So for about 6 months, the 3 boys, men in the house, were not allowed to pee in the toilet. We had to go outside and pee somewhere around the perimeter of her garden. At night, we had to pee in jugs next to the toilet so she could sprinkle it around her garden the next day. It wasn't as successful as she hoped. The final solution was an 8 feet tall fence around the entire garden a few years later. Story 10. My parents never let me look at people kissing on TV when I was a kid. Not sure what they were trying to teach me, but I guess I should thank them for my adult awkwardness in PDA situations. Story 11. When I was young, my mom made us go to bed at 6 p.m. I remember the sun being out and hearing kids outside playing. She got married soon after, and the guy had a daughter, so that rule went away, but I really think she just didn't want to deal with us. We spent all day outside playing when we weren't at school and wasn't allowed to come in until she called us in for dinner, and then it was baths and bed. I can't imagine just napping. Never checking on my kids and having your young kids roaming the neighborhood all day. I had a friend who lived down the street. Her mom was like my second mom. I remember roller skating and falling on my knee and scraping it pretty bad, and her cleaning and bandaging it because I knew I wasn't allowed to go home. And on school days, we were in after school childcare until they closed, so then home, dinner, bed. Story 12. My dad built our home with his bare hands. We grew up kinda house poor, based on how much my parents sacrificed to get 5 beautiful acres and build a home. So, my dad demanded we make things last, which included walking, or rather, waddling, down the carpeted hallway edges instead of the middle like a normal person. Because if we walked normally, the carpet nap in the middle would get worn out and look like white trash. Story 13. That's a rule at a friend's house. Friend's family had this nice house with a nicely finished walkout basement with a kitchen, main area, bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. It was furnished as if it was an apartment, and the entire family, including 3 kids, lived down there full-time while the 4-bedroom upstairs was fully furnished, and they would only use the main part of the house if they were hosting company. It was bizarre going over there because we'd get in trouble if we tried to play in the big unused part of the house. When I asked him why they all lived in the basement, he said his mom doesn't want to have to clean it all the time, so they just didn't use their big house. It was so weird. Story 14. If I stepped outside in my socks, even right outside the door for 2 seconds, The socks were considered dirty, and I wasn't allowed back inside unless I was barefoot. Meanwhile, shoes could be worn in the house no problem. Story 15. Couldn't walk in the living room. It was vacuumed in stripe patterns, so they would know if there were footprints. When I had to vacuum it, I wouldn't turn it on, just push it to draw the stripes. Story 16. My dad had severe OCD. He converted our garage to a studio apartment that we were never allowed to enter. He had his own dishes, and if we were ever caught using them, they became family dishes. Even washing them wasn't enough, they were ruined. He boiled it hell out of everything he put on the BBQ. Chicken, ribs, hamburgers, etc. All boiled first. Lots of cleaning quirks, but I'll leave it there for now. I could go on for days. I thought a lot of these things were just normal stuff until I stayed the night at my first friend's house. He went to the cupboard to get me a cup for a drink. I was like, you can just use any cup you want. His mom asked me why I asked. So I told her what my house was like. I remember the look she gave me, and from then on, she always invited me over for sleepovers. We weren't abused at all, but she thought our home life was insane. Story 17. No chores. I'm dead serious. My mom was so overprotective she wouldn't let me do any kind of chores. She never let me near appliances or showed me how to do the most basic of housework. The only thing she told me to do was clean my room, but never showed me how to clean it, so my room was always messy. Now I'm 25 and had to beg my dad to show me how to use the dishwasher, clothes, washer, dryer, and oven. I can wash things and make frozen things in the oven. That's all I can do. I'm still scared of the stove. And now I can't get my mom to show me anything because she's been dead for 11 years. Story 18. Oh, where do I even begin? 1. No cuss words. Not even the word crap. Had to be crud. Couldn't say bees, the acronym not the actual word bullshit. Had to say I don't think so. Couldn't even use it when playing the game BS2. Girls didn't fart, they fluffed. Couldn't say farted. 3. Had to make our beds in the morning or we were grounded for the entire rest of the day. 4. Couldn't have an attitude or grounded for weeks at a time. 5. The most strict etiquette when eating, could not enjoy a meal because you were being constantly criticized. 6. Could not make any messes or leave any personal belongings outside of your bedroom, or else they would be thrown away without consult. 7. Had to shut lights off when leaving a room even if you were coming back into the room minutes later. I was grounded a lot. My dad was military, so very strict with just about everything. And any toe out of line got you grounded. Now that he's older, he admits he was too hard on me. Story 19. We weren't allowed to say, that's not fair, because life isn't fair. To this day, I am preoccupied with fairness, equality, justice, to an almost obsessive extent. Sounds like the beginning of a superhero movie, but it's just crippling ducking anxiety. Story 20. When my brother and I had a fight, we would be locked in a dog cage in the backyard. If we fought in the car, we would get bagged and were forced to wear pillowcases on our heads until we reached our destination. It could be 45 minutes up to 4 hours. We laughed about it telling friends, and it only dawned on us how ducked up it was when we realized our friends were not laughing. Story 21. My paternal step-grandfather wasn't the warmest fellow. He wasn't the type to get down and play with us, tease us, or even speak to us, really. Weird guy. However, he had a thing for Little Debbie snacks and kept a few boxes always piled high next to his adding machine in his office. Every once in a while, he'd just randomly give me or my brother one when we were visiting, and we never knew quite what to think. But woe unto us if we ever stepped foot into that office uninvited or pilfered a fudge round. I once moved his adding machine to grab an envelope for my grandmother, and I wound up doing hard labor for hours the next day as penance. I might be exaggerating the hard labor portion, but I did have to paint the entire foundation of his workshop with a suspiciously small paintbrush. On the other hand, my grandmother was a real corker. She wore stilettos with everything and drove a Corvette. She'd gone to Woodstock in her youth, and she and my father used to race motorcycles together. She was obsessed with Bruce Lee and Kojak, called everyone Toots, and I never once saw her without her signature red lipstick. She also loved taking my brother and I shopping when we visited, but we always steeled ourselves for what we knew was inevitable. Her screaming in a shrill voice about sticking close to her because there are perverts everywhere. I cannot imagine what others must have thought when we entered a store. Usually people snickered, some would echo, "That's right," and others probably just stared in wonder. She was a piece of work. That whole side of my family is just really weird. Story 22. Not allowed to do homework on the weekends. Was forced to have family TV time instead, where we watched Days of Our Lives, of all things. I would secretly do it after everyone went to bed. Story 23. Before we could play ping pong, which was in the detached garage, we had to clean any oil or grease spots on the floor with kerosene and a rag. Also, and this continued into my middle 20s, we had a code for calling the landline because my stepfather refused to get caller ID way after the time it was included free on most phone services. Ring 3 times and hang up, ring twice, and hang up. Then our mom or stepdad would pick up the third time we called. Story 24. My mom always cooked at home. There were 7 of us, and eating out was always too expensive. If we said we didn't like something without trying it first, my mom would make us eat 2 helpings of it. It was okay to say you didn't like something after you tried it, and she wouldn't make you eat it, only if you hadn't tried it. I thought it was a fair rule. It sucked, but it made our taste buds more adventurous. Story 25. No naps, not in the car, the house, if you were sick. ECT, my dad couldn't nap. Terrible sleeper. So we couldn't either 12-hour road trip, no sleeping in the car, and no whining either flu. Doesn't matter, I think the only exception was when one of my migraine medications I was trying made me vomit for hours before I'd fall asleep with my head pressed onto the edge of the bathtub. And he'd leave me alone. Basically, if he was awake, you had to be awake ducking love naps as an adult. Story 26. If we didn't hang up the phone properly or left off the hook, we were told the phone police would come arrest us. We were checking for dial tones religiously to make sure we weren't going to jail El Mao. Story 27. No making funny faces because your face will get stuck like that. No cutting hair at night because the witches will steal it. No drinking coffee because it will stunt your growth. No vacuuming at night because it will suck up the spirits. Story 28. Unless it was for school or I was with one of my parents, my sister and I were never allowed to leave the apartment. We couldn't have friends aware, and we couldn't go to friends' houses. Probably why I'm such a homebody now with anxiety issues around people. Story 29. Still have to follow this now because I still live at home. Even though I'm 21, rent is insane. I can't lock my bedroom door or any bathroom doors during the day when I'm in my room or on the toilet. My dad will get pissed off and try to knock the doors down. It's flat up abusive IMO. Story 30. If the fridge door was open, with or without a child kneeling behind it, my dad would body slam it close. We got a lot of concussions. Probably mom didn't believe Dot in hospital visits until pain was present for 3 days and head injuries were easy to fake, according to her. Story 31. Hyper-Christian parents were very worried about Satanism in the 90s and early 2000s. So no Pokemon or anything with magic. All my friends played RuneScape D&D. Also, no Halloween or anything with monsters. As a parent now, Pokemon is my favorite show to watch with my kid, and Halloween is probably my favorite holiday. Somehow, I haven't tried to summon the devil or performed any satanic rituals. Story 32. To the best of my knowledge, this is still the rule there today. It does not matter if it's 90F, 100F, or even hotter. And extremely humid out. The moment the clock hits 4 or 5 p.m. during the hottest part of a summer day, the AC must be turned off, all windows immediately opened, and it is time to cook dinner. Not any old dinner, mind you. No, we have to add insult to injury. We will pick the hottest July day to make the kind of dinner that requires 2 huge pans of sizzling food that takes a long time to cook, and 2 huge pots of boiling stew dumping heat and humidity into the house for at least an hour, usually much longer. The house will easily hit 95F. The reason is heat-intensive dinners that take a long time to cook cannot be made during cooler months, at night, or while the AC is on because it will ruin the food. Story 33. My mom's boyfriend. From when I was about 5, 12 wouldn't let us have breakfast after around 9:30 a.m. Would have to wait till lunch if we were late. Us boys, 3 of us plus every other year his son, were banished to the basement so he could mostly pretend we didn't exist and have my mom to himself. It was my mom's house. I called him Dad, as my biological father passed away when I was around 2, 3. There was no goodbye when my mom ended the relationship and he moved out. I was and am friends with his son, and was around him after that on occasion. We never talked about it. He passed from COVID a couple years ago. Story 34. Ours was don't sit on the trunk. It is a camelback trunk that my brother and I would pull out into the middle of the room, put a pony saddle on it, and ride it. We had a perfectly good pony outside. Story 35. There were so many. We had 2 doors onto the front porch. We were only allowed to open one, and that was just to get the mail. I only remember one time when the other door was open. Ice cube trays, having been emptied, must be rinsed and set in the dish drainer to dry. Don't just refill it and put it back in the freezer because, according to my mother, the droplets of water or any leftover ice bits wouldn't mix properly with the new water, and your ice would be wrong. There was a method to how the floors must be vacuumed. Washing the car, you start at the bottom and go up, because otherwise you get streaks. I said it made more sense to start at the top, and the water could work its way down and be loosening dirt, but no, you had to start at the bottom. You had to. Story 36. During summers in Texas in the 80s, on most days, my brother and I were told to not be in the house from 9 a.m. until lunch, and immediately after lunch, usually 12:30, until dinner, usually 6 o'clock. If we were thirsty, we were told to drink from the garden hose. If we wanted to roam around the very large neighborhood, we could, but we were told which streets were in the boundaries. Essentially, the major roads that were the entrances to the neighborhood. If we wanted to go to a friend's house in the neighborhood, we had to call them if we were inside the friend's house. That lasted from the time I was 8 until the time I was 13. My brother and I were far enough apart in age that we didn't really roam the neighborhood together. I'm amazed I was never kidnapped. Story 37. This wasn't my house, but a friend across the street. Evidently, his father didn't want us ringing the doorbell or using the front door. So, if we wanted to visit, we were supposed to go around to the side of the house and knock on the door by the kitchen, which nobody ever heard. It was strange. Generally, if you wanted to play, it was best to call him first, so he could meet you outside. They did have a separate phone line for the kids, which was kind of an unusual thing to have in the 1970s. Story 38. My parents had a rule that we couldn't use the microwave for popcorn because my dad thought the smell lingered too long, like a popcorn-scented ghost haunting the house. Story 39. It was my dad's weird rule. We were not allowed to sit on any furniture in the house if we were wearing clothing that had been worn outside. We had to come in and change clothes immediately. No one was a germaphobe. He could never explain it, but that was his thing. It finally stopped when I was about 12, I think. Story 40. I had inconsistent rules about what I couldn't watch on TV or how I could sit based on who was watching me. Dad's grandparents, I couldn't watch Rugrats and Hey Arnold, even though I watched it at home all the time. For way too long, they forced me to watch good, albeit little kid shows like Madeline and Bear and the Big Blue House when I was 8 or 9. When I was truly little, I could make pillow forts with couch cushions at my other grandparents. But one related great aunt. I wasn't allowed to make a fort. Other grandparents, I couldn't watch Pokemon because it was of the devil due to evolution, but I could watch all that. Story 41. No sitting on couches, only 1 cup of water per meal, only 1 fun activity per weekend. Sunday was family day. No using the phone. You can talk to your friends at school. Couldn't say him or she when referring to mom or dad. Way too many weird rules. And they all depended on mom's moods. Story 42. There was a lady all the neighborhood kids loved because she would stand outside and give us snacks. Well, unless you had to really go, she wouldn't let you use her toilet. I thought she was weird at first because she would grab your shoulders, strictly lead you to the bathroom, and stand outside the door waiting for you. She asked me if I washed my hands and I told her yes. She praised me for it because she heard the water run. She wore a hijab, so I think she was Muslim, and I heard being clean was a part of their belief. But at the time, didn't know what a Muslim was at all. I miss her cooking. Story 43. Going to the toilet. First, I had to ask permission. Then I had to wait until the toilet door was unlocked. My mother would then stand by the open toilet door until I sat down. I would then hand her the toilet paper. Mother would tear off 3 squares and hand them to me. That's all I was allowed. If I needed more, my parents took it as a sign that I was eating and drinking too much. Story 44. My parents would make up rules on the fly and punish me for not obeying them. For example, when my sister and I were like 6, 7 years old, she had the brilliant idea to respond with "da pop" every time someone said "so," like soda pop. It's one of those dumbass things kids do that they think is so clever. This went on for a few months, and my parents never said a word about it. Then one day, I fired "ye day pop" at her for the first time ever. And out of nowhere, my dad hits me hard enough to knock me to the floor and screams, "I'm sick of this da pop schmidt!" Then he stormed off. Of course, she never said it again after that. Story 45. Kids not allowed to bring any books with anthropomorphic characters into the house. We could play with Legos for hours, but we're banned from bringing a Richard Scary Big Adventure book, or any material with talking animals, or animals wearing clothes the mom didn't want her children growing up thinking that cats and dogs wore sweaters. I hated that house. Story 46. For some reason, my parents hated it when they asked my brother and me where we wanted to eat for dinner on the nights we didn't eat at home. And we'd reply, "I don't care." Truly drove them nuts. We started saying that I have no preference, and bizarrely, that response never bothered them. Still don't get it to this day. Story 47. Don't ask Grandpa about his grandpa. After he passed, we did Ancestry, and there is literally no record beyond my great-grandfather. Like UDF happened, no one would ever talk about it. Story 48. I wasn't allowed to give out my phone number or tell other kids where I lived, and I wasn't allowed to have friends from school over. I was only allowed to hang out with the kids in my neighborhood. My parents divorced when I was a toddler. My father initiated the divorce, and my mother missed the custody hearing because she was out of the country visiting family with me and my little brother. She was supposed to hand us over when she got off the plane home. She instead took another flight to a different state and essentially kidnapped us. Story 49. It's hard for me to spot a rule that's weird. Usually, I don't know something is off until I bring it up and people look at me crooked. Anyway, this is minor, but I wasn't allowed to cross my arms because it made me look like a boy. My mom would smack me if she caught me doing it. I was raised in an abusive household and there were a lot of nonsense rules, but that one was probably the most baffling ones, especially because I was the only one who would get in trouble for it, despite my sisters doing it. Story 50. My mother had some very strange rules when we were growing up that weirdly got stricter as I got older. Asterisk, you had to dish up everything that was available at a meal and had to eat everything on your plate. Luckily, I'm really not full of nonsense with food now. Asterisk, you had to take a glass or a cup back to the kitchen immediately after finishing your drink and was not allowed to leave it somewhere, or heavens forbid, forget it, without major ramifications. Asterisk, my curfew in high school was between 12 and 1 a.m. It changed to 10 p.m. in my early 20s. I had to be in bed by 10 p.m., lights off. Story 51. This one isn't too bad. We weren't allowed to watch R-rated movies. This was before Netflix and streaming platforms, so it was pretty easy to enforce. And my sister and I weren't ever actively trying to break this rule, as we didn't really mind it. It's only funny now when my husband asks me about iconic movies from around the 90s, 2000s, and he is always shocked I haven't seen them. My response is always something along the lines of, well, it's rated RR, so I have to ask my parents. It's become an inside joke. Story 52. Not allowed in the house after school. Change clothes. Do your homework on the back porch. Then do your chores. After that, you could do anything you wanted but couldn't go in the house until Mom called us for supper, after everyone had eaten. Everything Mom had put on our plate, Dad would go set and watch TV. He picked the show, and no one could speak. We were sent go bed at random times. We were afraid of Dad. His punishment was illegal, to say the least. We were never touched for a hug or bedtime thing. Story 53. When my wife, then girlfriend, and I moved in together, she lit a candle that was on our coffee table. I was like, what the heck are you doing? At that moment, it dawned on me that some people actually burn candles, as opposed to having them just for decoration, like my mom. Story 54. No morning showers allowed because apparently it cost more to shower in the morning compared to showering at night. As an adult with my own home and children, I could give less than a schmidt when they bathe, just as long as it happens lol. Also, there is almost zero difference in water usage between morning and night at my house. Story 55. Not me, but my dad, who grew up on a farm in Kansas with his 6 other siblings. His grandmother believed in the idea of children should be seen and not heard. If Dad and his siblings were in the house while she was there, they had to quietly sit on the couch in the living room, so they usually would find a field or something and peace out to play out there. Story 56. Not allowed to walk around in socks with no shoes. I got my revenge when I moved into my first nice apartment alone. They came to visit and I made them take their shoes off at the door. Story 57. No shoes were allowed on a table, ever. If you bought new shoes, in a box, in a bag, and you put them on a table, my mom would lose her schmidt. She claimed that it was bad luck, and that someone you knew or loved would die as a result. Story 58. When my dad got home from work every day, he'd go into his study with a whiskey and we weren't allowed to talk to him for 1 hour. I have to admit, I kind of wish I had this rule myself, but my kids wouldn't follow it in a million years. I feel like missing an extra hour of them every day would be doing myself the disservice. Story 59. When I was about 14, I asked my mother, who I was made to live with when I was around 11, to put on a shirt and stop walking around without clothes. My punishment was to immediately remove my shirt and bra when I got home from school and walk around topless. If I covered myself, another week was added. It was her husband's idea, but she totally didn't give a duck and made me comply. Not so much weird as it is full-on SA, sorry to ruin the vibe. Story 60. I wasn't allowed to drink milk at someone else's house. It was the 1980s, and drinking milk was considered an act of healthy living. It was necessary to a lot of people. My mom said asking someone for a glass of milk was like asking them for vitamins, which would be weird. And deprive them of nutrients. Cut to me in 2013 watching a friend house a quart of milk at another friend's house, completely horrified. Like, I didn't know friend hash 1 was so rude. And stranger still. Friend hash 2 didn't even care? I learned a lot that day. Story 61. If we said something sucked, we had to listen to our homophobic dad rant about what we'd really be sucking. Like IDK man, I'm in 5th grade. I'm using slang, not saying I'd like a throbbing cock in my underage throat. To this day, my dad hates when I say it, so I just moved 1,000 miles away instead and say whatever I want. Story 62. At my babysitter's house, we had to eat the meal standing in the kitchen. Then only after finishing the food were we allowed to have a single Tupperware cup of watered-down Kool-Aid. She used to make 4 pitchers out of a single packet, without sugar to wash it down. I choked down an especially dry stuffed pepper once, and then threw it back up because it got stuck in my throat. Duck you and your cheap-ass Kool-Aid Twila. Story 63. We had a lot of food rules, probably what led to my eating disorder in high school. No gum, no candy, no fast food, no processed foods. It's not an awful thing on the surface, but my parents were extreme with it and obsessed with being thin and having thin daughters. Also, no TV on Sunday, some weird church bullshit rule. Story 64. My parents were anal about TV ratings. I had to wait until I was 13 to watch PG-13 movies, and had to wait until 17 to watch rated R movies. I got grounded a few times before I was 13 and before I was 17. However, they didn't give a crap what I read. I read my first Stephen King, Pet Sematary, at 10 and was reading Danielle Steele by 12. Go ahead, try to figure out how that makes sense. Believe me, it doesn't. Story 65. My father had a phobia of leaving the country. Weird, but true. So we had a rule that we could never leave the country. Sounds easy enough, but we lived in South Texas, and it seemed like everyone went to Mexico on vacation or for the weekend. Hell, I had friends whose families had beach houses or just second homes in Mexico. Didn't matter, can't go, never, Story 66. In high school, I could hang out with friends for 3 hours maximum in a day. And this could only be on a weekend and not consecutive weeks in elementary to middle school or so. These were a few I remembered. No joking. Started when my brother said something that made me upset, and then he said, "Just kidding," and then jokes were banned in our household. No riding bikes. After my brother and I crashed into each other while riding bikes, bikes were banned too. Story 67. Every weekend, I had to mow and edge the front and backyard, regardless of if the grass was alive or not. We lived in SoCal, and in summer, the lawn would just die for like 6 months of the year. Still had to mow it. Every Saturday. By September, it was basically just dragging a mower over bare dirt. Story 68. My parents would literally tell us to duck or hide under the seat when a police officer drove by. They said if they saw us in the back of the car, that why would take us to jail. But now growing up, I realized it's because we were kids in the back seat without car seats. Not sure if they even really understood that, and was just told that by other foreigners, so they just followed along. Story 69. Only my dad was allowed to turn on the lights at night. Not even my mom could turn lights on. If you got caught turning a light on, he'd lift you up to the light and make you squeeze the hot light bulb. If he suspected you turned on a light but ended up inflicting no minimal burns, he'd get even more angry and squeeze his fist over yours so the bulb would shatter into your fingers and palm. Nice guy. Story 70. There were false accusations that I was taking too many of the good pieces of food shared with my sibling. For example, the buttery popcorn pieces, the nacho with the most toppings, the chunkiest puppy chow pieces, etc. So I wasn't allowed to look at the food while we ate it. I had to look straight ahead at the TV Abe'd eat without looking. Story 71. We were not allowed to sit on any beds in the house with our street clothes on. Also, my stepmom got this really nice custom couches from Italy. We were not allowed to see on them for like 3 years, especially if we had our street clothes on. Street clothes you wore outside in public. Also, if you were sick, you had to drink from the poison bottle, straight up oregano juice. It was awful. Story 72. My grandma and Nana didn't let us in the kitchen when they cooked, always telling us to get out. Just last year, I found out my uncle, my grandma's son, was in the kitchen as a child, and a pot of boiling water fell on him. Just recently, I seen his burn scars all over his back and stomach. He never ever took off his shirt. I can't imagine how my grandmother felt when it happened. Story 73. Me and siblings and cousins were slapped by parents if we answered our grandparents back in their native language, which we understood but was the only one they spoke. We had to only use English for speaking. Story 74. U.S. kids were not allowed to eat at the table. We had a different table to eat at. Once we went outside, we were not allowed back in until dark 30. We had a roll of TP that was kept in a coffee can. We took the TP with us out in the woods to do our business. A few bologna sandwiches were handed out the door in one plastic cup to share. Story 75. When I was in high school, after my parents found out I was bisexual, they decided I was no longer allowed to wear pants with excessive zippers on them, anything other than the fly. Because of how, as everyone knows, all bisexual people who wear more zippers than strictly necessary do drugs. Story 76. This is the most lighthearted response I've got. We weren't allowed to watch Tiny Toons because it encouraged violence. And my mother never used the word gun. She always said artillery in an attempt to discourage my brother and I from any interest in firearms. She was a soldier, jokes on her. We are both firearms enthusiasts. Target shooting. Story 77. My mother moved from Ukraine to the West in her 20s. She was convinced there was still acid rain, Chernobyl. So I was never ever allowed to get my head wet in the rain. Story 78. At my best friend's growing up, middle HS, if we wanted to go do something together, like go to the lighthouse or visit the old sugar mill ruins, we had to write a research paper first. We would give our papers to my friend's mom, and then she would decide if we could go or not. Story 79. Squeeze the toothpaste tube from the bottom or suffer lunatic ravings from my dad. Of course, now that I'm programmed that way, my husband squeezes from the middle, and it drives me insane. Story 80. I had to mow a 4-acre property with push mowers in 90-degree and above heat. My father believed it would teach me the value of hard work, discipline, and dealing with adverse conditions. When I moved out of the house, he bought a tractor. Story 81. During the summers, when my brother and I were home alone, we were only allowed to watch Andy Griffith, Leave It to Beaver, or Barney. We had to write essays every day detailing what happened in the episodes to prove we watched it. This continued until I was 16. Story 82. My parents assumed eating food unseasoned was healthier for you, so we were forbidden to use salt, pepper, and condiments in our meals for almost a decade. Story 83. We weren't allowed a whistle because my grandma and mom believe it would conjure snakes because they saw it in a movie from their home country when they were young. Also, no shadow puppets either because they would come alive. Once again, because of a movie they saw. Story 84. My mom made me wash my hair with shampoo every night, but I wasn't allowed to use conditioner because the extra time in the shower would make the water bill too high. My hair was like straw and had split ends halfway up the strands before I moved out. Story 85. At my grandmother's house, You had to point the remote control asterisk directly asterisk at the television. If your aim was even slightly off, she would squeal like a phaser beam was about to disintegrate a hole in her wall. She would freak out if you aimed it at your head. Radiation. Story 86. We weren't allowed to sing along with commercials because my mom said it proved we watched too much TV. We would just lip sync when her back was turned. She wasn't mean, she didn't bust us even though we were super obvious, LOL. Story 87. If me and my brother fought, we got made to stand in stress positions. Apparently those were torture methods used in SS training. It did not, however, stop us from fighting. Story 88. Have a hot shower if you get sunburnt to take the sting off it. Didn't realize how horrible that advice was till I told my wife in my late 20s. Story 89. My dad built his house and was absolutely nuts about putting holes in the walls. I remember asking if I could hang a calendar in my room and he said no. Story 90. One time I was a small kid. I was crying. My dad told me native treaty kids never cried. I did not pay them to cry. I grew believing native Canadian kids never cried. Story 91. I could dye my hair any color, cut it however I wanted, but I wasn't allowed to use hairspray because my dad didn't like how it felt on his girlfriend's hair in high school. Story 92. We weren't allowed to bring candy into the house. One Halloween, my stepdad lost his schmidt over candy wrappers being left around, so he made this rule. Halloween was never the same. Story 93. Some kids at school made the mistake of saying I'm bored to or around their grandfather. He made them sit for hours doing nothing. He had been a POW for I think years in Vietnam. You don't know boredom. Story 94. At my uncle's house, spiders had the right of way. The whole house was full of wolf spiders. Most had names. I accidentally stepped on one once. They had my mom come pick me up. I wasn't invited back. Story 95. I can't really think of a weird rule growing up. My parents were really chill. We had to eat dinner together, but that was about it. I usually wanted to eat dinner with them anyways. I was always home. Story 96. No footstep sounds, no slipper sounds, no stepping on creaky floors, and so on. I'm almost 40, and people still ask me why I walk so quietly and freak them out.